Prince Ahmed had heard rumour that tomb robbers were at play within his kingdom, raiding the ancient tombs of his far distant forebears, back even before the coming of the Prophet, peace be upon him. These vagabonds, these thieves, these brigands were stealing the gold from the very bones of his distant ancestors. And so he set out to lead an expeditionary force to find these villains. For Prince Ahmed was a man of action, not one merely to send out his soldiery to do the job for him. He wanted to be at the head of the band of warriors. He wanted to be in on the action, hacking and slashing with his scimitar at these wicked people, these defilers of the dead. And after many days' journey into the desert, they came to one of the mountains where the tombs of the ancient dead were built into the very caves themselves. And there, one of the eagle-eyed scouts within this band of soldiers saw signs of tents in the distance, the fluttering of flags, and as they approached closer they could see the tents more clearly. And they decided to dismount, to leave their camels to one side and creep as quietly as they could up upon this band of villains, for surely no one with good intent would camp so close to the tombs of the ancient dead, for everyone knew this was an unlucky thing to do. And stealthily they crept through the sands, approaching closer and closer, until one of the soldiers held up his hands and pointed that the prince might see. There was a prone figure in the sands, and there another, and there another. And they realised that whatever this was, there was probably no threat here now. And so, somewhat less cautiously, they approached the first of these prone figures, and they saw a man dressed in such poor clothes as would befit a brigand of the desert, his throat ripped out, his face scratched and terribly torn, his flesh cold, dead for hours. Indeed, it looked as if the jackals of the desert had already been gnawing upon his flesh. And they went to the second body and found much the same, and the third much the same. And then they explored the tents, and they found that they had been ripped and torn and slashed as if by swords or daggers. Bodies strewn here, bodies strewn there, a dozen bodies in the very least, until one of the soldiers called to Prince Ahmed and said, "This one is still alive." And Ahmed rushed up and saw not some toothless tomb robber, but a woman. Her clothing ripped and torn, thin and emaciated, she lay in the desert, and the soldier said, "She's still alive. She is still..." Feel her pulse, and Ahmed put a hand to the woman's neck. It was a beautiful neck. For all of her thinness, she was a beautiful woman still. And there was a distant fluttering pulse, that her clothing had been ripped and torn. But even though it was ripped and torn, the veil pulled away, Ahmed could see that the material of the clothing was quality, that this had once been a fine dress as befitted a high-born lady, not some wretched female that might attach herself to a band of vagabonds, but perhaps, and he speculated to the soldier, perhaps this was a woman that they had abducted and held for ransom. He had not heard of any high-born ladies locally being abducted and held for ransom, but maybe they had taken her from somewhere else, who could say? And her eyelids fluttered. She came back to consciousness just enough to look at him, a thin smile upon her face, and she fell back into unconsciousness. "We must take her to a place of safety. We must take her to a physician to get her wounds treated. See, she has bruises, she has cuts. Who knows what terrible things these awful men may have done to her?" They picked her up, they placed her on the back of the prince's own camel at his insistence, and off they rode, leaving these wretched slaughtered men to be fed upon by jackals and vultures in the desert itself. Back to the prince's palace they went, and there the physicians were summoned, and they tended to this poor unfortunate lady, patched up her wounds, revived her with potions, replaced her ripped and torn clothing with clean, fresh robes from the palace wardrobes provided by one of the various ladies in waiting of the court. And within a day, she was fit enough, recovered enough, that she could sit and talk with the prince, who was eager to know who she was. And when he, Ahmed, introduced himself, she introduced herself as Kaelan. And she had indeed, she confirmed to him when he asked, had she been abducted by these wretched traitorous villains within the desert? And she said yes, she had. And the encampment had been attacked in the night, but she could remember little of it except for the screaming and the bloodshed, maybe some rival band of villains, thieves falling out amongst thieves, stealing the gold robbed from the tombs of the ancient dead. Who can say? She could remember little of it. And Ahmed was quick to reassure her that really all of the villains were dead, so did it matter who had killed who? And when he asked her, of your family, my lady, your father, your mother, you have brothers, you have sisters, someone to return you to, she said, alas, alas, Prince Ahmed, my family are beneath the sands. And she held her head sadly. And he felt sympathy within his breast, and she was a beautiful woman, an educated woman. She spoke finely, she spoke in a refined manner, and she was able to discourse upon many subjects, upon the stars, upon the lore of the desert, upon music, upon poetry. And as day rolled into day, Ahmed felt his heart being lost to her. For Ahmed, a handsome man, a wealthy man, had yet to marry, and his mother, seeing the stirring of first love, well, she was not desperately amused to marry him off to a woman with no family known of to speak of, all of them beneath the desert sands. But she was clearly a fine-bred lady, a genteel lady, and, well, a first wife is a first wife, and there would be others with wealth and with family to come. And so, at the prince's insistence, the marriage was arranged, and arranged quickly. Within a month of her attendance at the palace, the two were wed. And on the morning after the wedding, when the prince was much satisfied and very happy with his lot, the Lady Kaelan, a princess now of course, said to her new husband, "Show me your ancestry. Show me where you come from." Well, she had met the mother, she had met the father, she had met the various brothers and sisters, but she said, no, show me further back. Grandparents, great-grandparents. Let me see the places of your ancestors, to know of your family. And whilst it seemed a little morbid for a honeymoon to be walking amongst the lands of the dead, nonetheless, an enthusiastic young husband is an enthusiastic young husband, and he took her where she wanted to go, and he showed her the family tombs where his grandparents and great-grandparents and great-uncles and great-aunts, going back for many generations, were placed in suitably austere and reverential manner. And she very rapidly learnt their names, learnt his ancestry almost better than he knew it himself, as days rolled into weeks and weeks rolled into months. And all would be happy, except on the third month, the third full moon, after the marriage, after the wedding. Prince Ahmed awoke in the night and realised that his wife was not by his side in the bed. And at first he assumed she was just attending to calls of nature, rolled over, farted and fell back to sleep again. But when he awoke again, an hour or so later, she was still not there. And he began to be concerned, and he awoke. He went to the door of the great red chamber, and there, of course, were the guards upon the other side, and he said, "Has my wife left?" And he said, "No, she is still in there with you. Is she not in there with you? She's certainly not come this way." And he went back into his bedchamber, ready to dress himself and explore further, when suddenly there she was, in the shadows of the trees. He said, "Oh, well, where have you been?" He said, "Oh, just answering the call of nature in the attendant cubicle." And he thought it a little odd because he had called out her and had no response, and he didn't quite know what to make of it, but he soon forgot her smile, her charms, her willing ways in the bedchamber took his mind off it all, and off they went. Time rolled on. 3 more nights passed, and the same thing happened again. And again, just as he was going off, ready to get dressed to explore the corridors and the rooms of the palace, in case somehow she had slipped past the guards without their noticing. He couldn't think how that could be done, but perhaps somehow. There she was again, and this time, even with all of her smiles and wiles and charms, there niggled at the back of his mind into the night, and there still, upon waking, not quite as refreshed as usual in the morning, the concern that she was doing something strange. And so he consulted with the palace physician and said to the physician, "Is there some potion, something I can take to keep me awake?" And the physician, who assumed this was for romantic reasons, to continue his ardour much longer into the night, chuckled to himself and said, "Well, there is a potion I provide to the palace guards, the ones on night duty, that keeps their eyes propped open into the wee small hours. You could take that." And so Prince Ahmed did. He imbibed. And he pretended to sleep, snored loudly, and felt within an hour or two of hitting the sack the movement of his wife beside him as she slid from the bed, trying to be discreet, trying to be gentle about it, but nonetheless he could feel the movement of her as she left the sheets. And he could hear the pad, pad, pad of her bare feet upon the marble floor. And he gave it a minute or two. And then he turned and looked, and she was nowhere to be seen. He went and checked in the smallest cubicle, and she was not there. He checked in the wardrobe, he checked under the bed, he checked everywhere he could think to look. She was not there. He checked with the guards. They had not seen her, and by now word was getting round the palace for guards to other guards that the prince was continuously asking where his wife was going in the wee small hours, and how very odd this was. And seeing the suspicious looks upon his guard's face, and not wanting scandal and rumour going around the corridors of the palace, for he already knew from past experiences with his brothers and sisters how quickly gossip spread, he retreated to his bedchamber, and a thought struck him. He looked out of the window, for if she had not gone out of the door, there was always the possibility she had gone out of the window, and they were on the next story up. It was a fair drop to the ground, and there was no sign of a rope or knotted sheets or anything of that sort. But as he looked out of the window, he thought he caught a glimpse in the moonlight distant of a figure moving, silvery, pale, as if the moonlight were reflecting off of bare skin. It could be her, it could as easily be anyone else, of course, but he began to wonder, was she going out through the window rather than out through the doors, or hiding under the bed, or anything as bizarre as that? And so he took a dagger from his belt, he dressed himself quickly, and thus armed with the dagger, he dashed not out of the window, for I say there was no rope and he didn't fancy the drop, but he went out the palace with a guard to accompany him, off into the general direction he thought he had seen that silvery moonlit figure. Away and away they went. And as they left the palace, with its pavements and its marble floors and the ornate gardens, the gate, the side gate, was just a little ajar, and it should of course be locked and bolted, but it was just a little ajar. and when as quietly as possible so as not to cause noise that would draw attention, they creaked that gate open a little more. There were footprints in the desert sand on the other side. And Prince looked at Soldier and Soldier looked at Prince. And as quickly but as stealthily as they possibly could, they followed the line of footprints in the sand, for these were very definitely human footprints. They were so petite, they had to be female footprints. Off into the sands they went. Towards the family tombs they went. And there, amongst the tombs of his ancestors, Prince Ahmed and the soldier heard crunching, heard cracking, heard gulping, and their hearts were pounding. As stealthily as wolves in the desert, they crept as close as they dared to one of the tombs from which the sounds were emerging. And inside the tomb it was as black as the pits of Gehenna. They could not see inside, but they could hear the noises of something eating. And the soldier drew his sword, but Prince Ahmed stilled him, for it was so dark they could not tell if there was one creature in there or 24 creatures. They might easily be overwhelmed by the state of what was in there. And he whispered and signalled to the guard that they should wait outside for whatever was in to leave, so that they could assess the size of the risk, whether to battle the threat itself or to race off and fetch back up. They waited and they waited. A full hour they waited, and the gulping and the slurping and the slobbering continued, and it was clear that whatever was inside was eating the bodies of the prince's own distant ancestors. And at length the door of the tomb creaked open and was pulled shut, and the figure that pulled it shut stepped into the moonlight, and there was the Lady Kaelan. "You!" bellowed the prince, unable to control his horror and his shock, and she spun round, her mouth as wide could be, teeth that would be the envy of any shark, filling that yawning maw. A look of surprise and then of very desperate hunger upon the princess's face. "What are you? What are you?" said the prince, thinking of all of the nights of passion he had spent wrapped in her arms, of where that mouth had been that was now so filled with monstrous, broken, snaggled, gnarled, snapping teeth. "I," and she spoke with a voice that echoed from the very depths of hell, "I, of course, my prince, am a Ghul, a creature of the desert. Do you not think that I have slaked my hunger upon your fat family, night after night after night? But now I am down to the very last one, and so I must find myself fresh meat for the morrow." And she slashed out at the soldier, who whipped his sword, but still, because she was a princess and he didn't quite know what to do, and in that moment's hesitation it cost him his life, as those enormous claws upon her once delicate hands, now the hands of a demon, ripped out the very throat of the man and smeared the blood and the flesh upon her mouth, a tongue so long it stretched down to her kneecaps, smearing and licking at the globber that was upon her. The prince screamed and turned and said, "You will never, never have my family, what is left of them," drawing the dagger at his belt. Oh, but my prince, it is not a question of whether I will have your family, but whether my family will have yours." And she threw back her head and shrieked an unnatural high-pitched howling noise and from the shadows of all of the other tombs of the great ancestors going back many generations, there emerged her mother and her father, her dozen brothers, her 24 sisters, her cousins, each as snarled and slavering as the ones that had ripped the throats from the desert bandits when they had had the audacity to raid the tombs of the ancient dead, where the Ghul of the desert feed. And what became of Prince Ahmed and his family and the palace guards, well, none can quite say, for they were never heard of again.